So here we are, the final game in the Max Payne trilogy. This one has been a long time coming, and by a long time coming I mean about 2 months, but that's besides the point. Now, I've been sitting on this game for quite a while now. It was the second actual Max Payne game I played all the way through, the actual order being 1, 3, 2. Which means that coming into this video, I already had some experience with this game before I started working on this video. But before I get into the real game, I should probably go over the game's development like I did for the other 2 games in the series, if you can even call it a series at this point. Originally, this game started development sometime in 2009, with Rockstar themselves at the development helm this time around, as due to the relatively poor sales of Max Payne 2, at least in the eyes of Take-Two Interactive, Remedy would no longer be involved with the development of any future Max Payne titles. However, after a period of development in June 2010, the game's release date was pushed back to December of 2011. However, it wouldn't be present at that time either, and the game wouldn't end up being published until halfway through the next year. Around the last few months of the game's seemingly endless development cycle, Rockstar brought Remedy back on board to make sure that they had their seal of approval. And after another delay pushing the game from a March of 2012 release to one in May, Max Payne 3 finally released on May 15th of 2012, and it's pretty good. I know most people consider it to be the black sheep of the franchise, and to be fair, it is. Dan Houser's writing is certainly good, but it still doesn't hold a candle with the writings of Sam Lake. Lake had a very clear vision of who Max was as a character, and Houser kind of fumbles it, to say the least. Compared to the stories in the previous games, this is definitely a sharp turn in tone, is all I'm gonna say. Whatever. Frankly, the game's writing in and of itself is worthy of an entire separate video as a whole, and if I'm being perfectly honest with you here, I likely won't be going out of my way to thoroughly compare it to the other entries in the series. Considering how much I fumbled the story in Max Payne 2, I figured I'm just gonna cross that bridge when I get to it, but for right now, let's get into the real game. For this playthrough, I played on the hard difficulty. Before this video, I've already played the game through all the way once on the normal difficulty, and compared to the rest of the games in the series, it was actually a relatively easy time. Not to rag on the other games in the series, I've personally honestly come to love the brutal difficulty of those games, but here I figured I'd just up the ante a bit for this playthrough, so hard difficulty it is. Oh, and before I move on, I figure I should give you all one courtesy spoiler warning. If you don't want this game's story spoiled, then I suggest you go and play the game yourself. It's actually pretty damn fun. Still here? Alright, I'm just gonna very quickly abridge this previous 2 games, so here we go. Max Payne 1. Max lives a good life, then he doesn't. He kills those who he finds responsible, along the way cutting down 90% of the New York Italian mob, as well as putting an entire multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical corporation under. Max survives this and moves on with his life. Max Payne 2. Max goes back to working with the NYPD until he discovers an entire conspiracy involving various characters and factions in the previous game. Most pivotally, a femme fatale assassin named Mona Sachs. The 2 lovers are unfortunately caught in the crossfire and Mona is tragically killed. Max then kills those who are responsible and moves on with his life for good. Oh, and remember that last part, it'll come up later. Also, I know those were very, very messy interpretations of the last 2 games, but I'm just going to go off of the assumption that you've already seen the previous 2 videos or played the actual game, so I just decided to abridge everything. Anyways, let's jump into the main event. We come to Max, moving into a new apartment in an unknown place. After settling in, he pulls a picture frame out of his bag. While we can't see the picture, we can pretty much infer what it is if you've played any of the other games in the series. This sends him down a depressive spiral, and he leaves his apartment and returns with a bag full of bottles of alcohol. After that, he just kind of sits around his apartment for a while, drinking, smoking, and reflecting on his life. Generally, he's in a pretty shitty spot. He's been uprooted from his home in New Jersey, and he's been struggling with alcoholism and an addiction to painkillers, an addiction that we kind of inadvertently caused. After a while of this, though, we flash forward to, spoiler alert, the end of the game, where Max stands bloody and beaten over a dying man. But before we can really understand what's exactly happening here, we flash back to a few weeks before. We find ourselves at a rooftop bar in Sao Paulo, Brazil, an entire world over from the dreary streets of New York. We're here on a private security job protecting the incredibly rich Bronco family. You might be asking, who are they, and why are you even here to begin with? Don't worry, your questions will be answered eventually, I think at least. But for right now, though, meet Raul Passos. He's not only our partner in crime, but he's also the one who offered this job to begin with. Not to spoil anything with him, but he's also apparently went to the police academy with us. But enough about him, let's meet the members of the Bronco family. First, we've got Rodrigo Bronco, the eldest of the brothers and an unbelievably wealthy businessman. He's basically the main guy we're trying to protect. Then we've got Fabiana, Rodrigo's wife. I'm just going to say right now that she spends 90% of the game as a damsel in distress rather than a proper character, but I suppose I'm getting ahead of myself. Then we've got Marcelo, the youngest brother in the Bronco family. He's a complete party animal and also just comedically out of touch.
I mean, just because we are rich and happy, is that a good reason to hate us? I do a lot of good in this town. A lot.
Jesus, I know Dan Houser loves his satire, but my god, this is just insane. The last character that I'll be introducing here is Victor Bronco, the middle child. He's been running for the mayor of Sao Paulo. There are other power players that get introduced in this section, but I figured I'd save their introduction for when they begin to play a big role in the story. You may have also noticed the lack of something that was a quite beloved part of the previous games. That's right, the iconic comic panels of old are gone, and they've been replaced with fully mocapped cutscenes. While some might call treason, I think this is actually a pretty decent change. Remember, the comic panels in 1 were just a way to cut costs, but they ended up becoming a beloved part of the series after that. Besides, almost all of the vocal performances are great, with James McCaffrey reprising his role as the man himself. The character has even been modeled after McCaffrey, so he's even more Max Payne than ever. That and his delivery is just top-notch. While I do have my gripes with this game's story, none of them stem from McCaffrey's portrayal of the man himself. He does pretty much magic with the material, it's honestly great. That, and like always, he does have some pretty killer lines.
My problem? Wanna know what my problem is? You're turning humans into glue! That's what my fucking problem is!
Anyways, after getting our short little introductions to the main cast, Max and Pasa shoot the shit for a while. Max brings up the point that he, like always, has a bad feeling about the whole party, claiming he smells something rotten in the air. To be fair, his assumption isn't wrong.
Guilty about their good fortune. Suddenly, things turned real ugly. Felt like our hangovers arrived right on cue.
After the goons grab Rodrigo and Fabiana, we give chase, and I suppose I should talk about the gameplay now, which presents us with another huge departure from the originals. For one, the gunplay as a whole has been drastically overhauled. Max's aim is much more precise, and the game favors more precise aim as a result, opposed to the just winning via volume of fire as the previous games. The bullet time system has obviously remained virtually unchanged, apart from the whole kills make you move faster thing, which was just ridiculously overpowered. Shoot dodging also no longer needs any bullet time, which makes it vastly more useful than it was in the second game. There's also a fully fledged cover system, which on paper sounds like it would absolutely derail the flow of the game as a whole, but in reality it's actually a pretty nice thing to add. Since bullet time games for each kill are lackluster, especially on harder difficulties, I often found myself killing a few guys on cover to replenish my bar, then leaving cover and using bullet time as a sort of Hail Mary to clear out the last remaining goons. Anyways, that's all I'll be covering, for now at least. Oh, and don't ask why my gun is gold, I'll explain that later. After killing some goons in one of the apartments, we can come out onto this balcony where we can hear Fabiana screaming below. She's being held hostage by a random goon, and so Max, thinking on his feet, jumps off the balcony and shoots the goon in the head, landing flat on his ass. At least he landed in some water. After trading guns with Passos, we leave everyone else behind and head downstairs to the lobby where to continue our search for Rodrigo. We follow a trail of gangsters, eventually leading us into a parking lot where he's being held. After clearing out the last of the goons, we can free him from the back of this van, and the boys in blue finally arrive. They just start blasting, though, executing just about everyone who's already been injured, something that Max picks up on but shrugs off, just being satisfied that he managed to keep the guy who sends his paychecks in one piece. Before the SWAT team can finish killing the rest of the wounded, some other detective guy comes and stops them. He'll be more fleshed out later. Anyways, with the Commando Sombra dead and the good guys saved, Passos declares this operation as a victory. Oh, and remember them Commando Sombra, they'll be important very, very soon. Anyways, after another small scene of Max slowly drinking himself to death, we cut to a few days later as we find Passos ferrying Max, Marcelo, Fabiana, and a new character named Giovanna, who's Fabiana's sister. She's the more level-headed and the rational of the two, as we'll come to learn later on. We're on our way to a nightclub so our clients can party away their brush with mortality. Once we land on the roof, Max disembarks to chaperone the socialites and Passos sticks behind at the chopper. Anyways, after we get inside, we can find the dance floor properly, and this is one hell of a place. Not Max's kind of place, though. Frankly, he hates every second of it. Anyways, after leaving the girls to dance on the dance floor, Max and Marcelo head up to a private bar overlooking the floor. P says some vaguely airheaded shit, which gives Max an opportunity to ignore him. Honestly, I can't blame him. But while he's busy letting his guard down, this party takes a turn for the worse. Hey, get your hands off my client! After saving Marcel, he runs off and we follow the goons who took Fabiana and Giovanna. Unfortunately for us, the door has been chained up and we have to find another way around. And since I'm already looking around, I figured I'd just go on a hunt for some golden gun parts. The parts themselves are just a neat little bonus collectible. If you happen to find all of them for an associated gun, it'll be gold. Simple as that. It can also have its magazine size increased dramatically, which is a helpful bonus. Anyways, after clearing out nearly half of this godforsaken nightclub, we can see that the girls are eventually being taken up to the roof of the building, so we give chase. Eventually, we run into Passos and Marcelo in the chopper. After circling around for a bit, we can see Giovanna and Fabiana being loaded into a chopper. They both see us, and Giovanna decides to book it. Max takes up a rifle and lays down some covering fire for her. This gives me a decent enough opportunity to talk about this game's inventory. To start, Max only has 3 inventory slots, which is significantly stripped back from his previous adventures. He can only carry 2 one-handed weapons, like pistols, machine pistols, and even a sawed-off shotgun. He can dual wield any of these two weapons on demand at the cost of having to drop whatever two-handed weapon he was carrying, which could be anything from a rifle to a grenade launcher. However, he can use one one-handed weapon, confusing I know, while carrying his rifle in his offhand. On a surface level evaluation, this might seem like another over 7th genified feature, but it's actually not the worst thing in the world. Compared to Max Payne 2, there are almost twice as many weapons, ranging from measly 9mm and 38s to full-size light machine guns and explosive weapons. Oh, and speaking of explosives, Max can no longer throw grenades, which is a genuinely missed opportunity. Anyways, back to the nightclub. After providing covering fire for a while, some turbulence in the form of a rocket launcher clown causes Max to fall out of the chopper and he has to kill a couple goons while clinging on for dear life, eventually falling back onto his ass for the second time in 2 chapters. We'll have to continue our search for Giovanna on foot. After putting an entire platoon of gangsters to rest, we can finally find her hiding behind this rooftop bar. Eventually, Passos comes back and scoops us up where we can learn that he and Giovanna are actually in a relationship. Still, regardless of her safety, we still lost Fabiana. After another scene of Max wallowing in sorrow in his apartment, we cut to the Bronco headquarters a day later. The goons that took Fabiana are part of the Commando Sombra, the same fine gentleman that crashed the party back in Chapter 1. Apparently, these fellas aren't actually from any of the favelas around these parts, and they aren't overtly linked to the drug trade in Sao Paulo. I bring this up because Rodrigo received a letter from them asking for $3 million in cash. While the Broncos debate on whether they should actually follow through with paying this ransom money, Max offers to deal with it, and so that night Max and Passos fly to a football stadium where the deal will be taking place. And yes, I'm calling it a football stadium because the game takes place in Sao Paulo. It just feels more correct, we'll say. Anyways, we're forced to forfeit our guns to the Commando Sombra goons, but before they can send the deal south, a third party decides to do that, killing off the goons on the field as well as severely wounding Max in the process. We'll have to book it inside before we're picked off for good. Despite the fact that Max has been shot probably thousands of times at this point, he says that this one somehow feels different, whatever that means. After slowly, and I mean slowly, stumbling through the halls of the stadium, we can find a small infirmary where Max patches us up and they discuss the battle plan. Before they can get very far on the planning front, though, some more Commando Sombra goons funnel in and we're forced to take them out. From here on out, we'll be chasing the guy who grabbed the bag of the money at the start of the level. However, after clearing out a portion of the stadium, we can find a Commando Sombra goon getting cornered by some goons wearing body armor. They execute him, bringing up a new question: who the hell are the goons in the military kit? Still, the bag bearer gets away for a second time now and we give chase, only to get stopped by a sniper from before. This is probably the only thing I don't really care for in this chapter, or all this sniper business. What I do like, though, is the music. This game's soundtrack might be one of the best I've ever heard. Instead of the guys from the first 2 games, it was done by a noise rock band called Health, and to say the very least, they absolutely fucking nailed it. Seriously, this is just insanely good. While I do think that this game has some relatively mediocre elements to it, this soundtrack is not one of them. Since we're talking about the band health, I should also talk about this game's health system, since it is actually very different from the first 2 games in one major way. If you get fatally wounded with a bottle of pills in your inventory, then you'll go into last man standing, where if you kill the person who killed you, then you can get right back up no worse for wear. The game even gives you a bunch of health back. Oh, and painkillers no longer heal over time, which is certainly something. Eventually, though, after taking out hordes of goons, killing multiple different snipers, and taking turns with Passos to play Sniper Elite, Passos finally catches up with the bag bearer who has been cornered by some military mercenaries. They execute him and take the money, leaving us even more puzzled than before, as well as $3 million short. When we link back up with Passos, we head back out onto the green and get into the chopper and fly away, but before we leave the stadium for good, we cut to 2 men who seem to be part of the paramilitaries. They contemplate blowing our chopper out of the sky, but they decide against it, one of them saying that they were only really here for the money. In the end, we lost the cash, but we did learn where Fabiana is being held, which is apparently up the Til River, which is where they decide to head next. Not before having a flashback to Max, dreaming of Jersey. We find Max sitting in a bar, somewhere in Hoboken, New Jersey, a few months back now. In preparation for this video, I decided to read the supplementary comic book that came out around the same time that the game did. It shines a light on Max's childhood, as well as detailing what happened to him after the events of Max Payne 2. I won't be going into detail about said comics, as you can find them for yourself and read them online. But basically, he got properly kicked off of the force, or maybe he retired, I honestly couldn't tell, which honestly isn't surprising considering all of the shenanigans that we got up to in the previous game. And after that, Max falls into alcoholism, drug use, and generally not a good place. He also spends quite a bit of time in this bar, and that's where we find him in the game. But before Max can get on with drinking himself to death, some unsavory figures barge into the bar and start causing a ruckus. The ringleader, Tony, was a snobby rich prick. His father was also some kind of well-known gangster, drug dealer, or some shit, so obviously this kid is just an asshole to everybody. For the past few days, these clowns have been coming into the bar and fucking with Max. This time, though, things get serious. One thing leads to another, and suddenly the guy starts waving a gun in Max's face, but before things can escalate any further...
Say you're sorry. Has been caught, motherfucker. Say you are sorry.
Say you're fucking
Look
sorry,
away from me.
you
Look away
fucking
from me. Don't you stare at me. Say you're sorry.
Listen to him.
Which you want first?
Don't act clever, you fucking leather jacket dipshit cop cunt. Don't act clever. I will blow your brains all over this
Fuck
counter
this
every
motherfucker.
fucking where.
Blow
Come on,
up.
Tony, calm
Yeah,
the
don't
fuck
fuck with me,
down.
Marty. I'll shoot you as well.
Marty,
Don't fuck with me.
Marty, he ain't fucking kidding.
Put the
Shut
gun
fuck
down,
up.
son.
Before we get our head blown off, Passos walks in and clears out the mobsters. Him and Max talk for a while, this being the part where Passos says that he went to the academy with us. This is also where he offers us the job to work security for the Bronco family. Max is about to turn down this offer, but Passos offers to buy him a drink, so Max decides to stay for a little while longer. While Max is busy busting it down alcoholic style, he begins to take a liking to Passos, and generally everyone is having a pretty fun time. At least until those mob clowns barge back in, all of them carrying guns now. Things escalate rather quickly, and Mr. Head Honcho does something uncalled for.
I had to give her that.
And just like that, Max and Passos became marked men on Mafia turf. After escaping the bar, we head outside, through some alleyways, getting ambushed by goons all along the way. Eventually, though, after killing the last of the goons, we can get to Max's apartment, which is as much of a shithole as you can imagine. Passos once again extends the offer to work security with him, but Max once again declines. After what happened in the bar, he just wants to lay low for a while. However, that plan falls through when Anthony DeMarco, big-time crime boss and a father of the dick we just shot in the bar, strolls up with 100 armed goons. Passos runs off, and when we try to follow, a bunch of snipers ambush us from an adjacent rooftop. After clearing them out, we get ambushed by a goon, but this guy, Brewer, saves our asshole spouting some shit. I honestly wasn't really paying attention. He wanders off down the hall, eventually detonating a bomb that was strapped to his chest. Judging by some of the things lying around his apartment, he seemed to be planning out a stunt like this for quite a while. He also has newspaper clippings detailing our firing from the NYPD. After that, we climb up to the roof and we clear out another army of gangsters there. After 5 levels of Sao Paulo back to back, it feels kind of strange being back in New Jersey. It's a welcome change, though. After killing the last of the rooftop goons, Passos finally decides to show up and we enter into this crumbling construction site where the mobsters have set up an ambush for us. Ah, dual-wielding MAC-10s in New Jersey. As weird as it feels nice to be back in the swing of things. After clearing out the construction site, we head down into a chop shop that has been around the corner from Max's place for God knows how long now. While Max's cop senses were tingling months ago about it, he didn't really end up doing anything about it because he was too much of a deadbeat drunk by that point. Still, at least we have the opportunity to do something about it now. After we clear out the last of the goons inside and around the chop shop, we can find some relative peace and quiet. Passos mentions that he's got some friends up in Queens where they can lay low for a while. Passos also makes his third attempt at offering a job to Max, and before we can see if he accepts it at this time, we cut back to Max and Passos in Sao Paulo, traveling up the Til River in search of Fabiana. A couple days after our scrape in the stadium, Max and Passos take a boat up the river in hopes of finding Fabiana. Passos speculates that a third party who jumped us at the stadium were members of the Crasha Preto, a band of paramilitary mercenaries. The people who took Fabiana are the aforementioned Commando Sombra, who apparently took Fabiana somewhere up this river. How and why the Commando Sombra and the Crasha Preto are at war with each other is unknown for right now, at least. After we arrive at the docks, Passos drops us off and we set out on foot through a stealth section, if you can call it that. Max attaches a suppressor to his pistol, and you can technically take out the first few guys without being noticed. I managed to fat finger it, and I ended up missing 2 shots on people who were effectively standing still. After killing a couple of the Commando Sombra goons, we can stumble into a warehouse where we can find a TV that has been linked up to a camera feed. On that camera feed is Fabiana, tied up and generally in shit shape. If we don't move fast, there's no telling what her captors will do. Before we have any time to process this, though, more goons come into the room, and from here on out the level is played loud regardless of whether or not you manage to keep a low profile at the beginning. After a while of shooting goons, we can find the place where Fabiana was being held. Obviously, she isn't there anymore, so we'll have to continue this search. This leads us into various different set pieces and shootouts, like this cool one with the collapsing boat. I haven't really been highlighting the overall level design for a couple of reasons, one of which being how linear these maps are. Compared to its predecessor, this game is extremely linear, probably one of the most linear games I have ever played. There are just very few branching paths to explore. 9 times out of 10, collectibles will just be hidden around a corner a couple of yards away from the main path. That and most of the actual gameplay just involves us killing people. But still, after clearing out some more warehouses, we can get to the docks, which makes up the best part of this chapter. Just don't dive into the water because it will kill you instantly, like all Rockstar games. But after we make it to the end, Fabiana is loaded onto another boat just before we can do anything about it, and the goons on the boat blow up a fuel tank next to us, causing us to fall into the water. Thankfully, though, Passos Deus Ex Machinas himself back into the game and picks us up. We take up arms and tell him to follow the boat. The rest of this chapter is basically just one long Terry section, so I'm just going to skip to the end where, once again, the Commando Sombra get away. So at this point, we've lost the boss's wife 3 times now, as well as setting him back about $3 million. We truly are the best of the best. A couple of days later, Max and Passos are called into the Bronco headquarters. The boss man chews us out for failing a 3rd time now, and Marcelo drops the now famous line that I referenced earlier in the video. We also get a more thorough introduction to Becker, the guy in blue. We first saw him earlier at the party all the way back in Chapter 1. He's a high-ranking member of the UFE. The boys in blue we also saw back in Chapter 1 executing the rest of the wounded at the party. That's all I'm going to say about his character for now, though. Him, Passos, Victor, and Marcelo all load into a chopper on the roof and they eventually head out, leaving Max to talk with Rodrigo. They chit-chat for a while, but eventually some members of the Crusher Preto enter the building, tripping the alarm in the process. Rodrigo tries to activate the security system, but it's been deactivated. We'll have to escort this IT guy to the server room so he can reactivate it. This is where the level starts properly, and I should probably talk about combat against guys with body armor, since fighting them is surprisingly different compared to the goons we've been facing thus far. Apparently, to Rockstar at least, wearing a Kevlar vest is the equivalent of wearing a fucking EOD bomb disposal suit, since any shots that land around their chest will merely stagger them. To actually kill them, you need to aim for the head, which is easier said than done in a shooter with time to kill as fast as Max Payne. Still, with some practice and a liberal use of bullet time, you can take these guys out relatively easily. Eventually, after clearing out a platoon of militiamen, you can reach the server room where the IT guy can reactivate the security system. After that, we check in on Rodrigo and we head out to the lobby where we can find that the receptionist has been executed. But in the middle of us examining the bodies, some more Crusher Preto goons drive through the door, and after we take care of them, some more goons roll up in a van and we have to take them out. After killing them, a proper Juggernaut steps out, kitted out with a ton of body armor and a machine gun. I get lucky and hit him right in his weak spot in the neck, which kills him instantly. After we're finally done killing all of the Crusher Preto in the building, we can take the elevator back to Rodrigo's office. His receptionist said that he hasn't said anything in quite a while, and when Max knocks on the door, Rodrigo doesn't answer, so we head up to the roof and go in that way.
Rodrigo!
Surprise, surprise, he's already dead. Max begins to look for clues, and he finds that the camera that was stationed in Rodrigo's office has had its disc removed, which means he can't view its playback. But before Max can go any further with his investigation, when Max comes to, the building is falling apart around him. If we want to get it alive, we'll have to escape. This section is basically just one extended walking sequence with some brief firefights sprinkled in. Once we make it out, though, Max can find a heavily wounded Crusher Preto member crawling out of the wreckage. Max decides to interrogate him, and he says that Fabiano was taken up the hill, which could entail literally anything. In the end, though, Max heads back to his apartment for another round of drinking, but in his biggest moment of character development in the game, he decides that enough is enough and hurls his last bottle of booze at the wall, deciding to quit drinking for good. After that, he heads to the bathroom and decides that he needs a new haircut, so he shaves off all of his hair. Sorry, that one just kind of warranted another 10. But the next morning, Max calls up Victor Bronco, who presumed that Max is dead. He accuses Max of killing Rodrigo, which Max rightfully disputes, but Max also says that he's heading into the Nova Esperanza favela in search of Fabiana. At this point in time, Max doesn't exactly have any kind of plan. He's just wandering the streets looking for any kind of clues when he bumps into this kid. This kid speaks enough English to lead Max into this giant street party where he is promptly mugged by some hoods who take his gun and kick him into a ditch. After this, he eventually stumbles into a bar/skin joint, which I can't show any footage of because of the fact that the game was made by Rockstar, so every 5 fucking seconds let us randomly cut to a shot of a stripper. Max asks the barkeep if he has a phone, which he does, and Max uses the phone to try to call someone, which doesn't end up working out. But right before Max can leave, some guy stops us, offering to buy us a drink. The guy's name is Wilson Da Silva, who you may recognize as the guy from all the way back in the first chapter. After the two get mildly acquainted, they get down to business discussing the details of the plot at large. Apparently Da Silva has been tracking this case for quite a while too, and he's also way further ahead than we are. He basically lays out all of the main villains thus far for the people who haven't been paying attention at all, and Max is just a complete fucking numbskull in this game. Anyways, the first goon on our list is Serrano, the head honcho of the Commando Sombra. We've seen him a few times already, first in the nightclub, then in the river chase, but at this point we've already put 90% of his gang out of commission. The real threat is the Crusher Preto, a group led by this guy, Nieves, and his right-hand man, Milo? I honestly don't know how to pronounce that, I'm so sorry. Da Silva also brings up the point that, of all people, Victor Bronco is involved with the Crusher Preto, at least to some extent. He also asks Max if he's seen Nieves anywhere, and Max says that he may have seen him at the stadium. While we, the player, know that he and Milo were there, Max technically doesn't. Da Silva did have a hunch that Max was involved in fighting that went down at the stadium, but he was unable to investigate it in any way. Instead, he asks Max what actually went down at the stadium that night. Max relays basically everything that he himself saw, but De Silva brings up the point that Max and Passos managed to get away. Max says that they still had to shoot their way out of there, but De Silva says that they willingly let him and Passos leave. Again, we the player know this, but Max is still skeptical. That's all from De Silva though, for now at least. He leaves, giving us a new gun on his way out as a parting gift. We'll be needing it soon, too, as some goons walk in and start pestering Max, kickstarting a shootout that forces Max to leave the club and head even deeper into the favelas. In my opinion, this is probably the game at its peak. The gameplay is fun, the visuals are a nice change of pace when compared to the relative cleanliness of some of the previous locales, too. Generally, though, this game does look very nice graphically across the board, even though it came out more than a decade ago at this point. For the next half an hour or so, we'll just be carving a path through these maze-like favelas. In reality, the favelas aren't actually that maze-like since this game is linear, but that's besides the point, honestly. But finally, after clearing out an entire army of goons, wiping out probably half a dozen different gangs in the process, we can finally reach it, the hill. If Serrano is anywhere, it'd be there. To get there, though, we have to kill another couple squads of Commando Somber goons, but when we finally get to the top of the castle, Max does something really dumb.
So many armed goons, but there was no backing out now. I would just have to act harder than I felt.
Put the guns down!
I'm just gonna skip ahead a bit here, since eventually Serrano just decides to cap Fabiano right there. Before he can carry on with dealing with everyone else, an attack chopper flies in, prompting Serrano to grab both Giovanna and Marcelo, that's right, they're here too, and head somewhere else. He leaves me alone with one measly guard, which doesn't really matter because the sight of Fabiano lying dead on the ground causes Max to have another flashback to his last day in Jersey. We find Max standing over the grave of his wife and infant daughter in the Golgotha Cemetery in New Jersey. Even if Michelle had been dead for longer than Max had known her, she still undoubtedly had a massive impact on the rest of his life. Before Max can really begin to grieve, though, some dickheads with guns walk up and crash our party. This chapter is probably my favorite in the entire game. It's open enough to warrant the use of shoot dodging, and the music is just phenomenal too. Seriously, this is probably my favorite track in the game, mainly because of one small detail. If you didn't catch it, if you listen closely, you'll hear the cries of Max's infant daughter Rose from the first game, which is just an insane detail. If that isn't dedication to the craft, then really I don't know what is. After clearing out an entire army of mobsters along the way, saving Passos' ass multiple times and killing a sniper, we can stumble into this mausoleum where we get ambushed by some more goons. They lead us over to a grave where Anthony DeMarco stands. You remember him, right? He goes on about how he killed his only son, and frankly a bunch of other shit before whacking Passos over the head and getting carried off by some of his goons. And we're left to dig our own grave at gunpoint. Obviously, Max and Passos managed to escape the sticky situation through some wacky hijinks, and we're back to shooting mobsters. After getting inside the main building through the morgue, we can enter the upstairs area into the chapel. Max and Passos decide to take a minute to breathe, but they get jumped by even more goons and we're forced to take them out. After a while of this, though, Max and Passos are pinned down by a goon providing covering fire from a balcony across the room. You have to run over there, but then run upstairs and kill him, but after that, even more mobsters storm in, and now it's our turn to provide covering fire. After killing the last of the goons, Max and Passos can step into an office with a phone in it, which Passos uses to call up one of his contacts in Queens, finally letting us escape from New York, or New Jersey in this case, which is even better. After Max snaps back to reality, we're back in Sao Paulo, still being held at gunpoint by this lovely gentleman. Since he's kind of a doofus, Max is able to easily disarm him and knock him out, allowing us to escape untouched. The favelas have practically descended into war at this point, with the UFE deciding to conduct a massive raid. They don't exactly seem to be too concerned with keeping anyone alive, judging by the many bodies we uncover along the way. At this point in time, our prerogative is to find Giovanna and Marcelo, if they're still even alive, that is. With everything that's going down at this point, it'll be a miracle if one of them makes it out in one piece. As far as we know, the cops aren't exactly here for us, but we've already blundered our way into enough trouble for one day, so Max decides to just let them do their thing. At least for a little while. Eventually he'll end up in unavoidable combat with them, and at this point this is where the gang members of old are gradually phased out by the tougher, more capable enemies that have body armor, like the Crash of Preto mercenaries or the UFE foot soldiers. Unlike the Crash of Preto, however, the UFE grunts often wear ballistic helmets in conjunction with their vests, which means that they can actually tank a couple of rounds to the dome before they go down, since we'll need to knock their helmets off. At the very least, the game starts to load you up with actually good weapons, like the G6 Commando, which is accurate and has a 40-round mag when turned gold. After carving a path through more sections of the favelas, we can make some worrying discoveries, to say the least. We can find a group of civilians being escorted at gunpoint by a bunch of UFE grunts, which presents some interesting questions. It seems like these guys aren't exactly here to make a couple of simple arrests, rather it seems like they're here for a much more sinister reason. But after tailing an UFE truck full of civilians for a while, we can get our questions answers that Max wishes he'd never received. So it seems that the UFE and the Crash of Preto are in cahoots, making deals for buying people. A band of hired killers and a group that's supposed to keep the peace are doing deals. Without a better plan, we decide to follow that guide that De Silva mentioned all the way back in Chapter 6. He leads us to both where Marcello and Giovanna are being kept, and before we can do anything about it, Marcello is lit on fire and burned alive. So we charge in, knocking out the unarmed goon in the process, before we take on the man himself. And how do we do that? With a fucking QuickTime event.
You bastard.
So long, whatever your name was. That's another big problem with this game's story. All of the villains are just kind of garbage. We only meet them once or twice throughout the course of the game, and usually it's right before we kill them. But then again, the villains of old like Vlad definitely set a high bar to pass. Anyways, after that we scoop up Giovanna and slide down into the muck and rest for a bit, right there, open and exposed where literally anybody can find us. In the meantime, though, Nieves, the other Crash of Preto guy, strolls up and blames Mac for the death of his partner in crime, which is mildly inconvenient for us, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But for right now, though, Max and Giovanna doze off for a while and we wake up the next day when the sun rises. The next day, we arrive at the bus depot where Giovanna phones up Passos, who might be able to get us out of here alive. Figuring that the bus depot would be kind of a shitty place to hide, Max decides that they need to keep moving, eventually setting on this bus boneyard as a place to lay low. After settling down in the carcass of an old bus, Max and Giovanna talk for a while, and Giovanna reveals that she's actually pregnant with Passos' child, which is mildly inconvenient. Before they can go on and talk more, some Crash of Preto clones stumble in and Max is yet again forced to fight his way out. The next chapter is spent fighting the Crash of Preto goons exclusively, as they have effectively replaced enemies without body armor at this point in time. You might think that this section would be an annoying escort mission a la Max Payne 2, but Giovanna is smart enough to stay put behind some dumpsters. After clearing out the gas station, we can head over to the main building where we can find the door is locked. Max is already about to call it a day when Giovanna has the idea to lower a service ladder down, allowing Max and her to enter the building. At least she isn't as airheaded as her sister, which gives Max a mild boost in confidence. Once we make it inside, we're ambushed by even more goons and we have to clear them out, eventually getting back outside into another parking lot which Max also thinks is still too unsafe. He instead opts for breaking into the main offices attached to the bus depot and hiding there, which doesn't exactly go to plan as the place is also crawling with mercs. But finally, after clearing all of them out, we can make it back outside the bus station properly. Seeing no better alternative, Max says that they need to hijack a bus and ride out of there. This starts the game's second on-rails church section, which isn't as bad as the previous one since we're given a gun that doesn't overheat every 5 seconds. After some excellent driving though, Giovanna crashes the bus into a building. Passos thankfully shows up right now and Max tells Giovanna to just leave and get to the roof to meet up with Passos while we take care of the goons on the ground. But finally, after killing off the goons, we can head up to the roof. And of course, Passos just fucking leaves us behind. Even after saving his future wife and unborn child, we just aren't that important. At this point, Max just decides to meander around for a while before Danny Phantom, De Silva, shows up and gives Max a ride out of there. The two end up at a parking garage where they talk for a while. De Silva reveals that Passos may not actually be all that he seems, as he was paid several times by Victor while Max hasn't gotten any kind of financial compensation for his actions. He also plans to see that Passos may have not even been on the force with us at all, and he may have just been lying to Max this entire time to get him to act as the sort of fall guy for his plan. De Silva also asks about his job in Panama, wondering what he had really been doing down there. Max was so loaded at the time that he didn't exactly know, but I guess we'll both find out soon enough. We now flash back to Max's second job working with Passos, protecting Marcello in the Panama Canal whilst on a yacht. True to Max's word, he was absolutely shit-faced down there, drinking himself into a stupor in the middle of the day. After talking with Passos and Marcello for a while, Max retires to his room for a midday nap and passes out for a couple of hours. When he wakes up, everything is unsurprisingly gone to shit with a gang of pirates attacking the ship. On the topic of gameplay, this level is pretty damn hard, probably one of the most difficult in the game, not helped by the cramped confines of the boat. At the very least, most of the enemies don't have armor, so they're not too tanky. Throughout the course of the level, Max discovers many clues that this job isn't exactly entirely what it seems, but at this point in time he just kind of brushes it off, more focused on finding where everyone else went. After clearing out most of the lower decks, we can make it to the engine room, where we can inadvertently cause the engines to malfunction by shooting at them. We have to shut off the engine fuel pump so the door to the upper decks can actually open and we can get up there. The rest of the ship is eerily silent of anyone other than Max and the pirates. Later on down the line, we can find a group of pirates preying off wall panel and looking for something. What that something is still unknown, at least to Max. The pirates have to be looking for something oddly specific if they end up leaving other valuables like entire cases of jewelry and such just lying about. But finally, after clearing out the boat, we can make it up to the bridge where we can spot Passos and Marcelo, who have been suspiciously absent for the entire fight with the pirates. Despite the fact that this screamed that the two are up to no good, Max just kind of shrugs it off and heads ashore to talk with the two. When we meet back up with them, they seem content at just leaving without our other client, Daphne Bernstein. Max ends up persuading Passos to come along and help him search for the rest of the passengers, though. Along the way, they end up getting ambushed by another army of pirates who set up shop in this sort of museum place. I honestly couldn't tell what it's supposed to be. Eventually, though, after killing the last of the pirates, we can make a pretty gruesome discovery.
Jesus Christ.
After that, we snap back to reality in the parking lot with De Silva, and they talk about the events that took place in Panama. Apparently, unbeknownst to Max at the time, the ship that they were on was smuggling something that the pirates who raided the ship definitely wanted badly enough to destroy the entire ship in the process. At the time, Daphne Bernstein, our other client, was going through a nasty divorce with her ex-husband, who happened to be a Wall Street banker. During the divorce, she likely got a good chunk of that money. So Marcelo got involved with her so that he could take some of the aforementioned money, and they were taking it to one of Victor's banker friends in Panama, as the money would have been easier to launder there. Despite the fact that Victor and Marcelo live well-off lives, they don't have a shit ton of money. Victor's political campaigns have always been financed by his older brother Rodrigo, and now both Rodrigo and Marcelo are dead. It sure is a coincidence that, of all people, he managed to stay alive throughout all of this. So in short, Victor is definitely, probably, maybe 100% behind everything that has happened thus far. Marcelo was a clown, and Passos was just some guy who could be bought into doing dirty work for the family in the end. And Max is just the fall guy. This is probably the biggest problem with the game's story thus far. I can at least mostly put aside Max's overall regression from his character arc in 2, but this entire scheme is just ridiculous. I mean, we just killed fucking hundreds, if not close to thousands of people over the course of the first few games. The man is effectively a one-man army, and you picked him of all people to be the fall guy in your little scheme. It's almost insulting how fucking stupid that is. Regardless, after all of those story revelations, De Silva and Max go on a little drive together. He brings up how a bus drove out of the favelas with a bunch of captives. Well, yes, we did indeed see that happen. The weird thing is that none of those captives were ever booked back at the station. Max suspected that they were handed off to the Crash Preto by the UFE. Anyways, the place that De Silva's takes us to is the Imperial Palace Hotel. Apparently, trucks of people are let in there under armed guard, but no one ever comes out, and I think you can kind of infer this is going right off the bat. So De Silva requests that Max goes in there and has a look around, and Max obliges, down in the Bowels of Hell. We enter the building through an open basement window where Max affixes a makeshift silencer to his pistol using duct tape and an empty water bottle. I swear, water bottle suppressors are a pop culture trope, as something like this wouldn't work at all in real life. It's kind of funny. After walking through some empty halls, we can find a makeshift morgue where some mercs are dumping bodies into a furnace. I'm sure you can figure out what this implies, but Max is still too thick-skulled to put 2 and 2 together at this point. After that, we head upstairs and encounter our first few enemies. I think this can technically be played in stealth. After all, you were given a silencer for a reason, but I again did not manage to do that as I fat-fingered 2 easy shots again, so I played it loud regardless of whether I liked it or not. Despite what this building's exterior would lead you to believe, this place is crawling with goons, probably close to 100 of them. Apparently, the Crash Preto have also been keeping tabs on Max, Passos, and even De Silva. Not really surprising considering Max and Passos' body count and De Silva's knack for digging into their activities. As we push deeper into the hotel, the music gets more suspenseful, and at the end of this hall we can find some sort of storage room where we can grab some files for De Silva. We also find this big metal vault-style door, and with no other place to go, we head inside.
On the other side of that door. I had to get those poor bastards out of there.
Well, shit. I suppose this explains where all of the civilians have been going. But not just the civilians, but the gang members too, as we find Serrano in there, beaten, bruised, and generally in shit shape. Max leaves him as he pushes on, eventually climbing to the roof via an elevator shaft. This is probably the most difficult stretch of the map, as we're given very little in terms of ranged weapon ammo, and every one of the enemies carries either an assault rifle or an SMG and is wearing body armor on top of that. This one did send me back to the checkpoint a couple times, but eventually I got back inside where I found this piano, and for a moment there was harmony in the world.
There it was. The soundtrack to my life. And, for a few seconds, came harmony. Finally.
Ah, Max Payne, truly a man of many talents. After that, we can probably find the most gruesome discovery in the entire series, because of course, the UFA and the Crash of Preto are involved in the illegal organ market. I suppose that's why everyone has also gone missing recently. The UFA have been rounding up gang members and random civilians in the favelas, then selling them to the Crash of Preto. The Crash of Preto then send them here where they get their organs removed and then sold on the black market. The money is then used for many things, possibly even paying for Victor's entire mayoral election campaign. The surgeon there pleads for his life, which obviously doesn't stop Max from waving a gun around in his face, but before Max can bust a cap in his ass, Sarando wanders in and kills him with a scalpel. After that, we can find this armor where Max uncovers some C4, which gives him an idea. He's gonna use it to send this place in orbit and crash this little organ harvesting party. This next section is probably one of my favorites in the game. You go around planting pieces of C4 on these red pillars. Apparently this place is already supposed to come down at some point, so we're just finishing the job. After all the pieces of C4 on the first floor have been planted, we get jumped by a squad of mercs, and when we're done clearing them out, we can head upstairs and then get ambushed by a group of snipers across the way, which we have to pick up a sniper of our own and clear them out with. And when we're finally done planting the last of the C4 on this floor, we can head up to the roof where the mercenaries are waiting for us, including the man himself, Nieves. This is also the part where Max says the funny glue line that I mentioned earlier. After a little back and forth, Max detonates the C4, sending the building down a collision course of collapse. If we don't move quickly, then we won't be getting out of this one alive. After clearing out the last of the goons on the roof, we get jumped by another juggernaut, and for some reason this one just gave me absolute hell. I don't even know why, I just couldn't manage to get a shot on his weak spot. I ended up just running up to the ledge in front of him where I managed to kill him by shooting him through the sole of his fucking boot. But after that, Max gets ambushed by Nieves. He goes on about some shit, but it turns out his main weak point is the fact that he fucking talks too much because Passos Deus Ex Machinas himself back into the game again to save our ass. Max is rightfully pissed at him, and he still maintains that he was pressured into doing things that he did. But the two eventually put their differences aside and they fly out of there in Nieves' chopper as the building collapses behind them. Later on that day, Max bids a farewell to both Giovanna and Passos. They intend on leaving the country and heading somewhere else safer. Salvador, Argentina, maybe even back to New York. In the end, though, despite Max's problems with Passos, he still thinks that he's a decent enough guy. And so they leave, and Max and Da Silva discuss the details of the case thus far. Max asks if he'll do anything to stop this shit, which he won't out of fear for his wives' and children's safety. Instead, he decides to send Max down to the police headquarters to get intentionally captured, hoping that Max will be able to get Becker out that way.
Go in here! Me in the ear! Hey, answer me! What are you doing here?
Damn, Max really got them with the oldest trick in the book. After we escape our captors, the level starts properly, and this is probably the most difficult one in the entire game. Almost every enemy is decked out in body armor, including helmets, making them a bitch to take out in a pinch. Regardless, this chapter is still probably one of my favorites in the entire game. Max's little stunt has the inadvertent consequence of freeing all of the other prisoners in the building. While we're not technically enemies, Max doesn't want to risk becoming a human shield and instead decides to leave them to their own devices. After clearing out the first few areas, we can make our way outside where we can stumble into the path of an armored car with a 50 cal mounted on top, which can easily kill us in one hit. This thing is just honestly kind of bullshit, since it can easily destroy the cover that you start behind and will almost instantly laser you as soon as you step out of cover. But eventually you can find a rocket launcher and take the thing out. After we get back inside via the parking garage, we clear out some more goons before stumbling into this lobby type space where we can look at a security camera, which shows us that we're about to be ambushed by another group of grunts. Normally this wouldn't be that big of a deal, but the game decides to toss in some smoke grenades, making this probably the most challenging fight in the entire level. Eventually, though, after carving a path through an entire army of UFE foot soldiers, the Juggernaut included, we can reach this small office with a bunch of CDs lying on a table, where we can find the stolen security disc from the Bronco headquarters. When we put it inside the computer, we can watch the security footage where we can see Bachmeyer, Becker's right-hand man, who you may recognize from Chapter 1 or 9, executing Rodrigo. Thankfully, he's right here on the premises, which makes our plan to kill the bastard even more straightforward. This is probably the closest the game ever gets to a boss fight, as you actually have to put some thought into taking him out. You have to destroy the ceiling tiles above him, forcing him to move out of cover, allowing you to get a shot off on him, which takes him out for good. After we kill him, we can take the keycard off of his corpse and head up into Becker's office. Max decides that the best course of action is to walk up to him and choke him out, which allows Victor, of all people, to show up and point a gun at us. Max makes a move to disarm Victor, but Becker tases him, stunning him for just long enough for the two to escape unharmed. Why they didn't just shoot him the second that Max fell is beyond me. Regardless, without any other leads, Max's big brain idea is to head to the airport, thinking the two will fly out of the country and escape. After all, rich people do love a flashy escape. Despite the fact that Da Silva wants to just stroll up to the runway in a car, Max decides to just walk right in the front door and gets spotted within 5 seconds of entering the building. Max decides to skip his check-in and head right into the back room of the airport, which is already filled up with UFE grunts. After we clear them out, we can head through some offices before we can exit out into the bathroom, which will hopefully lead us into the main departure gates. And before I move on to the next section, I suppose I should highlight the fan favorite in the soundtrack. With the absolutely banging music and the wide open spaces which makes the combat actually fun, it's easy to see why this is a lot of people's favorite level in the game. This section is just an absolute gauntlet too, with nearly 3 dozen goons all ready to cap your ass. After we clear out the main terminals, we can begin heading in the direction of the tram that will take us in the direction of the hangars where Victor will hopefully be. Once we get on said trams, you might think that you'd have a second to catch your breath, but since this is a Max Payne game, that's out of the cards, and we're forced to defend the train from the UFA. Eventually, they also breach our train, and we have to clear it out before we get to the station. But finally, after we arrive at said station, we sneak off in the direction of the hangars. The place is just crawling with cops, which makes our job quite a bit more difficult, but after some sneaking around, we can find the hangar where Victor's private jet is located. He's guarded by an entire platoon of foot soldiers, including Becker, who's decked out in body armor and wields a grenade launcher. So Max just decides to stroll on in and alert the nest, causing Victor's plane to pull away and just about every UFA grunt on the property to take up arms. The fight itself is pretty straightforward. Becker only fires his grenade launcher every now and then, and you're more likely going to spend most of the time fighting with the other goons in the hangar. But eventually you can run up these stairs and get a shot on Becker's grenade right as it leaves the barrel of his launcher, which sends him flying backwards, ripping off his arm and severely injuring him in the process. And here we are. As is serious tradition, we already saw this at the beginning of the game, but now we have the benefit of added context. The game gives you the option to just let him bleed out, but I decided to shoot him. You might think that that'd be it, but we still have to catch Victor, and I think you can infer what that entails. That's right, we've got another on-rails turret section. De Silva rolls up in his car and we take Becker's grenade launcher and hop in, telling him to follow the plane, which he does. The entire runway is crawling with goons, some of which roll up beside us in armored cars, but eventually we catch up with the plane and destroy it right before it takes off. Miraculously, Victor survives this. Max contemplates just executing him on the spot, but De Silva persuades him into letting him go to trial. Victor is positive that he'll walk, and Max ensures that he'll do it in crutches.
You know I'll walk. You'll walk with a limp!
We then cut to a week later in Bahia, where Max sits at a bar watching a news report on TV. The UFA were disbanded on the implications that they'd been trafficking organs, which they were, so that's pretty good. Victor was also found guilty of laundering money, among other things, like being involved with the organ trafficking scandal on top of that. He was found dead, hung in his cell. In the end, though, Max actually gets a pretty optimistic ending, as he gets to walk off into the sunset with his troubles hopefully over for good. And so there you have it. Overall, I thought this game was actually pretty good. I know for most people this is easily the black sheep and their least favorite of the franchise, which, to be fair, it is definitely the black sheep, but I don't think it should be written off as a mediocre game because of that. Sure, I may have my gripes with the game's story and its portrayal of Max's overall regression from his arc in the second game, but I still think this game kicks ass. The gameplay is good, the music is phenomenal, the story is majorly flawed. I know some would consider this to be a pretty disappointing end to the trilogy, but frankly I think it's a miracle that we even got a third game to begin with. Considering the fact that the franchise had been dead for nearly a decade when they started development, on top of the fact that Max's story was basically already over in the second game. This makes the likelihood of Max ever getting a fourth installment very unlikely. Canonically, Max is not only pushing 60 at this point in time, but he's moved on from his escapades, going on to live a simple life. Meanwhile, the game itself also underperformed, at least when compared to Rockstar's other works at the time, which sold like fucking crazy. However, surprisingly, Remedy recently announced that they'd be working in conjunction with Rockstar on a remastered version of both the second and first games in the series. At this point in time, it's more of an idea than functioning game, and is likely multiple years away from any sort of announcement or release, but as someone who really likes these games, I'm very excited to see how it turns out, if it comes out at all. But for now, that's all for me. Thank you for watching.